What I love about working with folks who do RALs is that they already are person-centered. So that's lovely because that puts us in a perspective where we're not working with an institutional provider who really institutionalizes people, because we really don't want them to be institutionalized. We really want them to be in a home-based setting. And that's where we work through our process. We believe that the person-centered care model is in addition to access to services and amenities, plus that supportive physical environment. You can't have one without the other. You can have, but you really is all about the operation and the strength of your operation. And we can make that easier through developing a supportive physical environment.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to today's episode of the Row Room Assisted Living Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Alex Schlo, and today we are thrilled to offer you the opportunity to tune in to an amazing webinar call that we had within the Row Room Assisted Living Mastermind. The Row Room Assisted Living Mastermind is the community for residential assisted living. If you're ready to take the next steps and make real moves in the residential assisted living industry, then you're going to want to join us in the Row Room Assisted Living Mastermind. It's an exclusive community where we dive deep into everything you need to launch and grow your own residential assisted living business. And today, on this podcast episode, you're going to have the opportunity to see and hear just how much value is in one of our weekly calls. We have calls every Monday night and every other Saturday. We also have community accountability pods, small pods, groups of community members who are committed to taking action and holding each other accountable. Not to mention, you'll get access to recorded courses, live calls, a Row Room calculator, resources, tools, funding opportunities, an expert network, and again, most importantly, the community to help you on your residential assisted living journey. This episode will be a little bit different than our typical podcast, and the sound quality will be a little bit worse. And that is because this is a webinar recording from a call that we had with Jane Rohde of JSR Associates. She is an incredible architect, and her team are absolutely amazing. In this episode, in this call for the Row Room Assisted Living Mastermind, Jane goes over everything that you need to know about residential assisted living design. Now, if you're listening to this, you will notice that Jane mentions multiple different pictures or features. She does an amazing presentation and has a lot of pictures, and the visuals are incredible. So I would encourage you to go to YouTube and type in the Row Room Assisted Living Podcast, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and watch this presentation on YouTube. That's going to give you so much more value. So without any further ado, let's get started with today's episode with Jane Rohde.
Welcome to the Row Room Assisted Living Podcast with your hosts, Charlie Cameron and Alex Schlo. This is your go-to show for cutting-edge insights from industry leaders in residential assisted living.
Whether you're ready to launch your own assisted living business or looking to invest in this fast-growing, high-impact sector, we are here to equip you with the tools, strategies, and confidence you need to succeed. Get ready to ride the silver tsunami and change the future of senior care. Now on to today's show.
We have the lovely Jane Rohde on the call again tonight. Call number 2. For those of you who are on the first one, whoa, amazing stuff. And I'm really excited to talk about designs of assisted living, which is something that she and her team do extremely well. They did one for us in South Carolina that we didn't end up pursuing, unfortunately, but the designs were beautiful. It was going to be great. And you guys also do new build designs, which I recently learned. After that fell apart, I was like, okay, what's next? How about Virginia new builds? So still something we're interested in pursuing. And oops, there's a Jeb and Dustin are like trying to get in here. Okay. Still interested in pursuing that. There's a lot of ways to skin this cat in terms of assisted living, but any way you do it, unless you're buying a turnkey existing thing, you're going to need designs, which usually requires a certified architect, whether it's the renovation piece or the new build. And even the renovation piece, like in South Carolina, they wanted not just certified architect, they wanted an electrician to view the plans, an HVAC engineer to review the plan. It was crazy. So you guys need to get it in your heads that you're probably going to need an architect or designer at some point. And that's something that Jane's team does. In addition to as you learned about last time, they do a lot of the regulations research, which of course is vastly different per state and area, which, right? Now there's similar like NFPA guidelines and codes that the various states can follow, but what they choose to do can be different. You can do that research certainly on your own, but it is helpful to bring an expert in to conduct that research with you. Okay, so I don't want to belabor the point. Jane, I know you have some materials to present to us, so we're really excited to learn a little bit about RAL designs. So
Okay.
I'll hand it over. Take it away.
Thanks so much. So I've been working in the senior living space for over 30 years. And so one thing I'd like to tell you too, that the other session that we did was on the regulations and how to go through the licensing process and all that. And it was recorded, so everyone would have access to that, right, Charlie? Yeah, please take advantage of that. And then on our website, we have a RALs page, and it actually has the same process steps that we had put on in the diagrams and stuff that we discussed in the last call, because that's really your place to start. So we've worked in care modeling, how care modeling can be supported by the built environment. We've worked through architecture stuff, but most of the architecture and design stuff, it's all about the details. So today we'll go through the different details of what we recommend from both a new construction as well as what to look at for an existing. And we've also had some regulatory wins this past couple weeks. So the South Carolina regulations that Charlie was talking about in terms of South Carolina project, we've gotten them to reinterpret what a dwelling unit means. And as a result, it changed how we're doing regulatory work in the state of South Carolina. Also in Nebraska, we were able to get the city of Omaha to accept a Nebraska amendment, which increased the number of units that we could get accepted within the International Residential Code instead of the International Building Code, which made things lots and lots easier. We're very happy with that. And one of our colleagues just got her approval today to move forward for construction on Douglas Street in Nebraska. So I think they've heard from Aaron before too. So it's been a good couple weeks of wins, even though it doesn't always feel like it.
Yeah, that was for Legato.
Yeah, that was for Legato.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, they love Nebraska.
Yeah, Nebraska's gotten better. We'll put it that way. We've had some good luck with that. So
Good.
Can you see my screen okay?
Yes.
Okay, so I can put that in full screen mode. So we talk about designing for residential assisted living, and actually this goes for other types of assisted living and long-term care settings as well as independent. But we always take everything from a person-centered care perspective, and we talk about it through the filters of 4 comforts. And you'll understand how things work together. But the reason we use person-centered coupled with the supportive environment is that without that care model and that position for the care model, it's very difficult to actually create an environment that can be more supportive. What I love about working with folks who do RALs is that they already are person-centered. So that's lovely because that puts us in a perspective where we're not working with an institutional provider who really institutionalizes people, because we really don't want them to be institutionalized. We really want them to be in a home-based setting. And that's where we work through our process. We believe that the person-centered care model is in addition to access to services and amenities, plus that supportive physical environment. You can't have one without the other. But you really is all about the operation and the strength of your operation. And we can make that easier through developing a supportive physical environment. That leads to more positive outcomes, more independence for the residents, more choice, more higher quality of life for both the staff as well as the residents. We have a lot of different terminology, and as Charlie has discovered too, no matter where you are, the nomenclature is different. Tonight I was working on some guidelines for commenting that helps with regulations for licensing in a hopes of not making things too hard for the residential assisted living marketplace, because it's very easy for bigger box or large facilities to think that, oh, this has to be for everybody. When you're doing a small house or an RAL, it does not. So we use terms like household and small house. Often that comes from people in the institutional side trying to deinstitutionalize down to something that looks just like a residential assisted living, except they call it something different. So they call it a household or small house. You may have heard the term greenhouse project. That is a brand name of a household small house model. Group home is something else that we use. Charlie mentioned Virginia. We've worked in Virginia quite a bit. They actually have a special code compliance that makes things a little easier because Virginia created what they call R5, which is an occupancy group. That occupancy group allows for small homes, and they call them group homes for 8 adults or less. And that is actually licensed through Department of Social Services. And so it's a completely different license, but it allows people to do things on a single lot, a single family lot in a single family home. And you can have them as close to each other as you want to. There's no jurisdiction separation, whereas in some jurisdictions, like in Omaha, you can't be more than, I think, 600 feet or 1,000 feet between homes. You also heard the term personal care home. A lot of times this is 4 or 5 residents living in a home. We also have adult foster care, which is in Michigan, allows you to have 20 people. And adult foster care in Maryland allows you to have 3 people, but it has a completely different financial structure. So each jurisdiction is different, but we all know that supportive physical environments can happen in any of those jurisdictions once we get through the regulatory side. I'd like to show you what we do for designing for residents, families, and the caregiver team. A lot of times when we talk about function and character, there's a functional component, but then there's the character or the design of how that works together. Things that are functional are things like your circulation space and your dimensions. Do you have the contrast located in the right places? What are your material choices? How do you maintain it? How do you disinfect and clean it? How heavy is it? What's the weight of it? What's the weight of your residents? Usability, all of those things from a functional perspective. But then you want to add the character, and that's where you come into aesthetics and the comfort, the human scale, what feels like home, what colors are familiar, or what colors are more appropriate for one culture versus another culture. Color is one of those interesting things because the research does not show that you can actually use a color and get X outcome. That actually doesn't really happen or exist. But the idea of having color and being culturally significant, it can be very significant. You do not use white in China or in Chinese communities, for example, because it has the sign of death, whereas in many cultures, it's the sign of light or white or good things. So you have to be careful in terms of what you use where. Red's another one of those sensitive colors. And it's good to use color because you'll see the aging eye changes drastically. As it changes, things like not having enough light and colors change because of the perception and the yellowing of the lens. Familiarity is a characteristic as well. We are used to seeing a love seat, a recliner, a dining chair. We're not used to seeing a geriatric chair or a wheelchair or something that's more like a medical durable device or piece of equipment. Having choice. A lot of times folks will say, oh, they have dementia, they don't have any. It's not really true. You can even, for someone who's nonverbal, you can show them 2 things and say, what would you prefer? So it's being understanding and empathetic of the person, the situation, and the character of the environment. And then what are the functional characteristics? Because the more functional a space is, how do you get the trash out? How do you do this? How do you do that? How do I get circulation through? How do I make this easier for my staff? Is going to obviously make things smoother overall. And then the character is coupled with that to make it feel like home. So this is a plan for Evermore. This is one of the projects we've been working on in Virginia. And it's interesting because a lot of times people will talk, I'm going to reduce the images here for a second. So part of what we see is that this is a new home, so it was a new build. You'll notice the turquoise back of house spaces. Those are over on the right-hand side of the screen. They're very similar to what we would have at home. We would have had a garage, but the square footage costs too much. So we don't have a garage, but we have a functional space that has mechanical space into it. And a back of the house mudroom is what it would be, probably similar to in a residential building or in a residential home. But we also have egress out of the laundry room. We have egress out of the kitchen directly. We have egress out of the end of the corridors for fire, but also for trash and waste. So we try to keep clean and soiled separate, because even though this is a home, that makes a lot of sense from a care perspective. So trying to think through those different pieces and parts. So this is the ultimate plan. It's a big hearth is what we designed for that, with 8 private bedrooms, with each having their own private bath. This is the vision of what it looks like on the porch. Easy accessibility. This is attached to the garden. The garden space does have some various types of garden opportunities for walking and wander paths, and also fencing and things like that, so it's secure. But this was the original design. The colors were different for the final. They went with darker gray colors. But the intention was to allow people to come in and out and be able to have freedom of movement, or what we call access at will, or free will. So it's like when you have food and food resources, if you have a pitcher of water or a pot of coffee or a cake plate or whatever you might have in your kitchen area, you want to be able to have people to have easy access. It frustrates people when they can't move about freely the way they would like to. So having those spaces and allowing for those spaces. So the 3 windows there, those are actually the staff space that's behind there. The client chose much darker finishes than we would have chosen. These were more of what we had recommended. And that's because most of you want it to be lighter or brighter. But on the flip side, we did use a drum fixture, a very large drum fixture, and the residents found that to be too bright. So having adjustability of light, we call that light leveling, and I'll show you a couple of pictures of that installed, where you have different levels of light that you can turn on and off to get higher levels without having to use a bunch of dimmers and things. Dimmers end up being this nightmare of where is the great space for dimmers, because people bump into them. They, even with lines on them, they change what they are. So it's much better to actually have layered light, and they're all switched separately, because that gives you the greatest control. And for future homes, we won't look at using the drum fixture with as much light in it, because most of the LEDs are much brighter than what people were used to at home. Also, depending on where your TV is and things like that, you want to look at things like glare. You want to look at things about reflection on the floor. You want that evenness on the floor wherever you can have it. We also chose to do very long windows and low sills. Sometimes I've heard some designers will say, oh, there's vertigo issues, there's this and that. There's not really anything to that in terms of allowing deeper sills. And actually, if you can see out the room from the bed, that's also a very good positive thing, because that helps the homeostasis. So people can actually see the horizon line. We do always have blinds and things like that we always use as well in the resident rooms, but we do like to have a lot of daylight and access to views wherever possible. When we're talking about these comforts, there's 4 of them. We call lighting comfort, acoustic comfort, mobility comfort, and thermal comfort. The in-between parts there are, and we'll share the recording with you as well as slides if you would like them. That's a how. What does that, some of that mean? But what the important questions are is what's along the bottom of the screen. Can you see where you are? Basically, you want someone to be able to see where they are, see what they're doing, and be able to adjust the light to what their task is and what their comfort level is. Acoustics, can you hear me? Is there enough of the acoustic capabilities and noise sources identified and mitigated so that you can hear me? Because half the time, that's part of the problem, is that people cannot hear each other, or staff can't communicate well because someone can't hear them. Mobility comfort has to do with, can you safely walk to me? Are you comfortable being able to get to me or get to where you need to go? Today, we were with my parents, and we really could have used some handrails in a corridor that we were in, for example. That would have been very helpful for my dad to get from the front door all the way to the office where we're going for his hearing checkup. For thermal comfort is, are you warm enough? And this is one that's probably the hardest and the most subjective, because you have older care workers typically that may need it to be a little bit cooler, whereas the residents are always cold. So I found that with my folks in my house. So I want the AC on and they would prefer the AC off. So we've been working through this balancing of keeping them as warm as possible because they're usually cold, and keeping me cooler. Same with staff, and it's the same with the resident comfort balance. So we have some opportunity to share that with you. The other thing that's interesting about thermal comfort, it's also something that's perceived, where lighting, acoustics, and mobility are more actual and tangible. Thermal comfort can actually be perceived based on the colors that you utilize, but also if you have a hearth or a fireplace that's usually electric. We don't usually recommend gas in residential assisted living. And if you're going to do that, though, the fireplace itself can emote a warmth, and that is something that is felt. It's like having a warm cup of tea. It has that warmth feeling to it that can add and contribute to thermal comfort for residents. So we're going to talk a little bit about value contrast. So basically, your brain perceives space by the edges. This came out of a University of Pennsylvania study many years ago that I thought was very interesting. But all edges need to be understood because that's how the brain works. So it's good for those with low vision, and then it's good for everybody. So what are the edges that you need to be careful of? Seating edges and the floor. If the floor looks the same as the edge of the seat and you don't have depth perception, then it's easier for someone to take a spill or take a fall. The grab bars, if you can't see the grab bars against a background color, if you have gray on gray or white on white, that doesn't help because then they don't know they're there to utilize. Toilets in a background color, potentially seat color. Sorry for the guys, but usually the seat color is more for them. So we had one community actually did it so that they were all red for men's rooms so that they would definitely get good aim. Handrails and corridor walls. So your handrails are one finish or color, and the back of that is a different contrast. Base, wall, and floor. So you basically don't want a lot of movement and contrast on your floor surface or different planes, but you do want to have contrast between the wall and the floor and the handrail and the corridor wall, etc. So the guidelines I was working on today, they're actually being published now. There's the 2022. That's the link that you'll find when we do the PDF for this set. But they're the guidelines for design and construction of residential healthcare and support facilities. These are licensing guidelines that have been adopted in several states. Right now, we're reviewing a set of plans for Colorado, for example, because they adopted the 2018 with some exceptions. So you have to go by the Colorado code that they have adopted, for the most part, all of the assisted living chapters for from the guidelines into their state code from the health department. The other one is the National Institute of Building Sciences. This is design guidelines for visual environment value contrast recommendations. This is a free resource. It's from NIBS, and it basically tells you what you need, what the differences are. Typically, it's a 30 light reflectance value difference. Where do you find that number? What does that mean? On paint samples, if you've ever looked at a paint sample from the store or from Home Depot or whatever, you'll see an LRV and a number on the back. It ranges from 0 to 100. 100 being white, 0 being black. So you want that 30-point difference in that. So if you have a very light wall surface that say it's at 80, you may want a 60 or 50 floor difference for your change of floor in terms of the tonation. So it's basically how dark is it versus how light is it. I really like this example because I think it utilizes the contrast very well. So you'll see that red is, you can tell where that indentation is. The yellow, they weren't afraid of using color, and you don't need to be afraid of using color. Just using it in the right context is the key. There's a little bit of movement in the flooring pattern, but it's not terrible and it's not a huge amount. And I think it wouldn't cause necessarily a tripping or a vertigo issue. The seats are a little bit darker, so they're in contrast to the floor. The table surfaces are very evenly lit. That's important because you want that ambient surface. And you'll notice that there's a pretty good contrast between the edge of that and the seating. So there's all looking at the edges. And so that's how the brain's perceiving it. You'll also notice they use white base, which is a very good contrast against the floor, also a good contrast against the wall.
Sorry to interrupt this episode, but if you're listening to this, then you're already an action taker. And that means you are exactly who we built the Row Room Assisted Living Mastermind for. If you're ready to unlock financial freedom by launching your own residential assisted living home, our community of like-minded entrepreneurs and industry experts will give you the exact steps to make that happen. From licensing to acquiring a home to funding your home to scaling to dozens of homes, we've got you covered. We don't just offer guidance. We provide you with the roadmap, the resources, and the launch pad for your success. And the best part? The investment in yourself today will pay you back many times over, giving you freedom, fulfillment, and financial success in the most incredibly rewarding opportunity in real estate. Ready to dive in? Check out theralroom.com and join us today. That's the RALroom.com. Hope to see you soon. Now back to the episode.
So this is an example of where you want to have light contrast and mobility. So this is carpet and resilient flooring. So that's luxury vinyl plank. tucked together. We transitioned this. We actually used a rubber base underneath this for an underlayment. So we used a thinner one underneath the carpet and a thicker one underneath the LVT to see how that would pair up. We want a level transition. So when you're changing from one material, there's no anything that's going to create a ambulation or a problem that for rubber bumpers is basically what we call them. When you see the little Armstrong circles, half circles that are in there, they are, or from Johnsonite or other manufacturers, you'll see a strip. We really would prefer to butt the material together if you can have the right transition strip. If you do need a transition strip, we recommend using Schluter, which is a small metal transition that actually fits between the edges. So it basically would look like, just like what you have there, where the seam is, you have a small metal edge that's the same height. So basically you're looking for overall tonality. So even though these are different materials, tonality wise, they're very good together because they don't have any contrast that jumps up or creates a perception of a step or a step down or a hole or any of those other type of things. So you can see here, these are different materials, but you can also see how the contrast and it is even, right? So they, even though they're different materials, they have a little bit different look. It doesn't look like a step or a perceived step in any of the situations here. So they have the same tonality. That's what you're looking at. And that's what we're talking about when we talk about low contrast between the surfaces versus the lower slide or picture that shows the contrast of the white of the wall and then the dark handrail. So you can really see the handrail, you can really see the wall edge, you see where the floor edge is, and you see where the flooring is located. That anytime somebody pauses, like if they're not sure, that's a fall potential risk moment. So this is an example of changing the light reflectance value between the floor and the wall. This contrast allows the older eye to see the edges of the room, and the flooring is very tonal, even though it has a little bit of pattern in it. We don't want super high contrast in the pattern in that particular plane, but it's tonal enough to still give you a little bit of texture. Don't do this. I was actually taking a picture. It was in Nashville. I was taking a picture of that housekeeping cart because it was so incredibly overloaded. But in reality, when I got the picture back, or took the picture and looked at it, I realized this was meant to look like sound waves because it was in the music city of Nashville. And what it did is it created this huge moving pattern. So hesitation or that perceived need to step over something, that's where the fall usually happens. It's when the shift and the higher risk can happen. There's a lot of different types of lighting, and there's lighting levels. You want to avoid glare. No one's comfortable in a glare environment. We've all walked down that corridor in an airport where the daylight's coming in. You can't see anything, so it's glaring off of the shiny terrazzo on the floor. And it's not comfortable, but it also creates, again, an opportunity where you can't quite see where you're going, and it can create fall risk. Circadian lighting is when we reset our natural circadian lighting. So that's daylight to evening and evening to morning. If you can assist with circadian lighting, there's many different types of systems now that are much less expensive than when we first started seeing circadian lighting being used. And it does help with everything from sundowners to people sleeping better at night, higher level of food intake, more movement, more activity during the day. We've seen great results with that. Tunable LEDs is how you do that. LEDs have really brought on a whole nother level of being able to do things with circadian lighting that we couldn't do with fluorescence or incandescence. Access to nature views and outdoors is something else we're going to look at. The value contrast we talked about and the light reflectance values we talked about. So you should look at dimming and balanced natural light. And when I mean dimming, really the layers of light that we were talking about. So you want to balance that with natural light with artificial light. I like this picture particularly because there's no glare. There's absolutely no glare in these pictures, and that's because they use a matte surface. Shiny does not mean clean. It usually doesn't mean clean, actually. And you don't need to put all that polish on. Most of the materials in flooring do not have to be polished any longer. So that's really, one of my friends calls it matte is where it's at. So we go with that as our claim. But you can see here that the gold seats have a good contrast to the edge. You can see the edges of the arms. You can see the edge of the seat. You can see the edge of the table and the contrast to the floor. I think this is an excellent example of how to get uniform lighting and reducing glare from the light source. This is another really good, I think there's a little bit of contrast between the flooring, the resilient flooring and the carpet, but I think the balance is still pretty good. I also like how the island stands out so that you have that dark gray against the floor. So that gives you additional contrast to be able to evaluate. contributing factors to perception. And so the slide in the middle is what the actual image looks like to the normal eye. Then you start looking at things through macular degeneration, you start looking at glaucoma, you start looking at cataracts, and you start looking at diabetic retinopathy. So you can see how it impacts different things. So in the center, if it darkens in the center, but it's bright on the outside, if you're trying to do some wayfinding or some cueing or some coloration, you may want to look at the outside. But in the same vein, glaucoma is the opposite. So you may want to also repeat whatever you're doing in terms of a cueing to the center as well. So it gives you an opportunity to better understand what happens when folks have these different conditions that happen over with age. And then we add the yellowing of the lens. So that even makes it more complicated. So you can see how different it is. So we have found, we use yellow glasses as what we used. Lighthouse.org is an organization that does it. We've also, for different clients and manufacturers, we've made up little cards so that they can look through and see the different, what happens. Like if you look at different finishes and things. But what we also notice, if you take yellow acetate over your finishes, you will tell what will drop out and what will pop up at you. Orange has a tendency of popping towards you and being too overwhelming, and dark, anything that's navy or toward the navy side will drop out and almost look like black and a hole. So it's an interesting way to do it. It's simple. You can use a little piece of acetate that's yellow, and it would give you a good idea of what happens with the older eye. To use daylight in outdoor space. If COVID didn't teach us anything else, it did teach us that outdoor spaces are incredibly important. We do think that this is a requirement that we would recommend for any setting, no matter what it is, for humans in general, because it's very good for them. It's also good to have a space for outdoors that staff can sometimes utilize, because that's sometimes a very good way of resetting, particularly if you're dealing with a high level of dementia residents and a lot of different stressors. Sometimes the outdoor space can be that calming space. And it can be a simple space, and it doesn't have to be a complicated space. But we also would say that, to me, the contrast on the concrete, that's a little bit whiter. Then I would use a little bit more aggregate in that and a little bit darker, because you don't want too much glare from the sun. Now, it's not shiny, and it's not a shiny finish, so that works into its advantage. I've also found that you'll see the light ballers that are in the community. I had issues on a household that we designed in Tennessee one time, because the landscape guy, he had put in those high bollards. He put them right across the front where all the resident rooms were. Those lights go on automatically at night, are incredibly bright, and would shine right into the resident rooms. Looking at how high you really want those would be much better to be right grade level and utilize the lighting that way. So there's all those little details, but those little details can really lead to a better quality of life. This is circadian lighting. So this is the start of the day is on the right, and that's your noontime, like when you're coming up, and as you're going down toward the evening, or you're coming up in the morning, right? So you want to start to settle people down. This helps with sundowners and that type of thing. You also have to be very consistent with your circadian lighting if you're going to change the lighting temperature. If you're going to go from a very blue light to an amber light, you want to be consistent throughout, because we found that in one setting that residents were in a living room space, they started to calm down and they got tired, and then they went back into a hallway to get to their rooms, and that hallway was full blue light. So by the time they get back to the rooms, they're all awake again. So there does have to be consistency throughout the house. This is a memory care household that we worked on in Buffalo. We were one of the senior living consultants that worked on it, and it was really great to see, because the lighting levels were set, and this was right after lunch. They were still fairly alert, and they had eaten a meal. The activities were good. They were demonstrating outcomes like more food intake, less restlessness, less anxiety, sleeping better at night, not as much sundowners. It's all those things that you hope for. You also don't want your lighting levels, you want them to be even, because you don't want to shadow low spots, like those spots that look dark light on the floor. Can you look like a wet spot? It can look like something else. We've had residents who, a friend of mine said the resident rolled their pants up, and she goes, "What are you doing?" And he goes, "I don't want to step and get my pants wet in the water," because the floor was so shiny with the light and how it shone on the shiny surface. He was afraid he would get his pants wet. I thought this was a very clever way of doing night lighting. We recommend using night lights, and using a lot of them. You might have seen the plugins. I have plugins all over my house right now. Helps everybody know where they're going to go to the bathroom and things at night. And the amber keeps people from waking up as fully. So it's easier to go back to sleep after you have an amber night light. I thought this was very clever. They backlit the tile behind it. I do not care for the hooks though. You see those two hooks up above right next to the shower. That's not so good because typically people will hang their towel there. We would use a vertical grab bar on either side of the shower. I love the rear drain in terms of a trench drain if you're doing new construction. And then we can also do a trench drain in the middle that utilize your circle drain or in the front. But the back allows it to completely sheet to the back in terms of the water. And it has recesses for the products because that's another thing that often gets missed. And then the grab bars throughout. And we would have one more vertical grab bar on that end where the hooks are and not use the hooks. Unless you have if you're doing towel bars, which we usually need, we would have done a towel bar there, but do it as grab bar strength because people aren't going to discern. They're going to grab whatever's there when they start to go down, if they go down. And that transition between the edge of the shower and the edge of the floor, that's where they have the most difficulty. And so perception like that, there's light in the shower is usually very important because if you pull the shower curtain closed, you can't see anything. Having the correct fans and the exhaust is also important. You'll notice this also has a slope underneath the sink, and that's to allow for accessibility for residents. We've also discovered that you want that as narrow as possible. We found a product that we've been using for that. We had one lady who had a little attachment that she used because her faucet was just a little too far away, and she would use that faucet to pull her faucet on and off. We usually use a single mixer versus double because if someone has an impairment in one hand or less strength in one hand because of stroke or something else, they can actually still modify the amount of water by themselves to see what type of temperature they would like. This is what we were talking about in terms of acoustic light layering. This is an adult daycare that we worked on, but you'll see it's bright at the ceiling, but it has that floating level. But it has different lights and the different lights at different levels, but we have even lighting for the most part on the flooring area and on the tabletops and on the countertop. But then we also have what we call acoustic layering, which is when you drop down different spaces. So if you have a very large hearth room and say you had a sloped ceiling and it seemed very large, that may want to be divided up a little bit or a panel put in on part of it just to create a smaller environment. People with higher levels of dementia do much better in a very small environment that has a little bit more control within that environment. And also depending on their mobility would depend on what they feel comfortable in. I like this example. This is a larger continuing care retirement community, but it has a good story behind it. This is a great acoustic layering. So this was an old space that had a very low ceiling, and it was that everyday low kind of very senior living looking type of space. And it's in Amish country, and the CEO is a very creative guy. He's a social worker by training, and he's a good colleague and a good friend. And he had one of the local Amish families. They canned all those different products and put those up and put extra salt in them so that you got that bright color. And then the slats were meant to look like the corn crib. And I thought that was a delightful detail. And I said to him, I go, so who talked to housekeeping about this before you put that in? Because to me, that seemed like a housekeeping nightmare to keep that clean. And he said, we did review it with everyone, and they agreed that they thought it was beautiful and they would keep it clean, and they clean it on a regular basis. They invited the lady over with her family to have a meal with them. She didn't really realize she was in a retirement community, and she leaned over and said, you must live near a retirement community. There's a lot of older people here. I love that because that's a compliment for sure for a retirement community, that it feels like a restaurant and an outdoor public space. It doesn't feel like something that you would think of as old people or something that was more for only skilled nursing or nursing home or anything about that. It really feels like it's something that you would see out in the everyday public. It even had a kiosk, so it was like a very nice Panera in terms of the branding of it and the beauty of it.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I really love this space. So circularity, functional, and circularity mobility. So this is the same plan that we were looking at that was part of Evermore. But you'll notice that how the furniture is laid out is very purposeful in terms of how the circulation works. How do the sleeping rooms work? We really encourage people to use 36 inches as your minimum to get around things. We use a lot of barn doors because a lot of times bathrooms don't end up with the closed door at all. But barn door gives people privacy if they need it, but it doesn't take up any floor space. Also the same, we don't find that the tub rooms are ever really used. If you're going to use a spa tub or something like that, We like to use a certain brand that actually has a tank that fills in around people very quickly. But for the most part, unless you have a dedicated program that has a dedicated fee source that you're using for that, whether it's reimbursed through a waiver or it's private pay, you really need a dedicated program with a dedicated person that's going to be using this. The other problem we had with this is we tried to get them to use a smaller space for it, but instead they put it in this big kind of salon type feeling space. So it wasn't something where you thought, yeah, I want to go in and soak in the tub, because it just wasn't intimate enough, but they didn't want to enclose it. So I think that was part of the issue as well. Caregiver, we always try to give the caregiver their own half bath, just so that they have a space. And then laundry, washer, dryer, folding space, and a laundry tub. And we've also started adding a floor sink to the lower level of it to make sure people can easily mop and clean without having to try to use the laundry tub to dump out their buckets and that kind of stuff. So it's just more of a functional thing that works much better for them. Refrigeration, a lot of people use Sub-Zeros and they use the maximum size for that. And then they'll use a range hood, whether it's gas or not. The hoods for most jurisdictions do require a UL 300A listing. It has an Ansel system or a sprinkler system that's utilized for that. And then we also require sprinkler systems throughout, and depending on your jurisdiction and what fire code is being used, that would either be a 13R or 13D typically, is what we find overall. But when we're talking about circulation and mobility, a lot of it has to do with placement and how much space between things and how many folks actually are in a mobility device or a wheelchair in terms of how they get around. Furniture dimensions, they can increase or they can diminish your independence. We want to increase independence. One nice thing that happened when someone moved into Evermore, it's a great story. One of the residents moved in and they were bedbound, and they brought them in. And he realized very quickly that the wheelchair that she was in wasn't set up right. It was set so that she would fall forward. So he had the care manager come in and take a look, got the right wheelchair, and could sit her so she could feel like she could sit safely up. Started coming to meals, started doing physical therapy, started doing some different things. And about a year later, she came out using only a cane, walking, and said to Dave, the owner, and said, I think I'm going to go home now, Dave. I'm doing good. And if I need you again, I know where you are. That's really kind of success, because most people in traditional long-term care, that's the end line. And in her case, it was just a new beginning. So I think that's lovely. Knowing that seating, it can be, you don't want it to be too low, too high, too deep. It's very Goldilocks, like always wants to have arms. So your ideal arm height is between 24 and 26. Your ideal seat height is 18 to 19. That's similar to your comfort set for toilets. And your seat depth, no more than 20 inches. The worst thing to see is one resident trying to help pull up another resident, and I have seen it, and you're just waiting for the disaster of the one to go back and the other one to fall forward, and then goodness knows, hitting heads, whatever. So it is really important to think about where the heights are. Also with the arm height, if you have any kind of apron on your table, that when you don't want that to slam into that, because it's also a finger pincher, but it just tears up your arms on your chairs, and it also tears up the furniture itself. We use a product called Qualu. It's actually extruded PVC product. It's more expensive, but the stuff will last forever. If you go to the local dealership or the local Value City or the furniture store and you think, I'm just going to get this, you've got maybe an 18-month life for much of the furniture. Whereas if you go with something that's a little bit more toward the commercial side, but has a residential feel and look, it will hold up much longer for you. So here's a dining chair example. This actually is a quality piece. Arm height 25.5, seat height is 19, seat depth is 19. Sometimes they're stackable, sometimes not, depends on the site. These are actually quite heavy chairs. So if you're going to use casters, only put them on 2 wheels. We typically put them on the front 2 wheels. You can put them also on the back, but they have to be the bigger, rounder ones, because the little ones snap off. And if somebody has a tendency of dragging furniture, which happens a lot of times with lounge furniture, the legs can snap off when that happens. It's usually not the problem with the furniture. I'm just amazed that older people can be that strong and can actually drag something that far. We also find that bended wood, this is actually quality, so this is extruded, but they do make bended wood that is pressed. It's layers, like a microlam beam would be, but it's actually utilized as wood. And that can also be a very strong seat and a less expensive seat. But also very effective for the population. And pillows and depths, you'll find little extra pillows, extra cushioning for the seat can sometimes, you want it to be firm enough, but you want it to be soft enough. It's like a balance that you try to get for every resident so that they're comfortable. But 25 inches for arm height, seat height 19, and seat depth 19. Also doing transfer. So if somebody is in a wheelchair, we try to not leave them in the wheelchair. So actually getting them up, doing the transfer, even if it's with a gait belt, transferring them into a chair is much better for them if you have the staffing capacity to do. So the love seat, same thing. Arm height's 26, seat height's 19, seat depth is 20. There are seats that are also made available that pop up the seat part, and that actually has a plastic liner underneath, and that actually catches anything that if you do have an issue. We use a lot of cushions and things that are more in the vinyl side. I wouldn't recommend polyurethanes. Polyurethanes degrade very quickly with cleaning chemicals, whereas if you use a vinyl, you get a much more durable seat. And then if you want to use some upholstery, we usually use Kryptons or something that's treated because of the moisture. And there's something, we call it the P test in our office, where we'll take a sample and actually put water on it and just grind it in with our heel of our hand to see how it does. So same with the lounge chair here, you can see it has the same dimensions that would be good and recommended. When we talk about thermal comfort, we're talking about the sense of warmth in home. So that personal control of the environment. In this case, we have a radiant heat panel. That panel is utilized for the resident comfort and warmth. Most of the staff don't head over that way too far, so it warms the area around the window where someone may be seated, but it doesn't impact the staff who are already over exhausted and warm, or overheated and warm. And then controls within reach. And we do have people like these kind of controls are very hard to read. I have a trouble reading them too. They're almost all gray on gray. So anything that can be in contrast is good. And you can set it in a range. So we used to use the round dials, right? That was really how people would turn things on and off. You can use the dials. Don't use a fake one. Some people actually do that. Then the resident thinks they're getting warmer or cooler and they just fake them out. I don't think that's really the right thing to do. I would go ahead and put the controls in, but you can put a range in so that it doesn't get too hot or too cold as part of that. We also find that the fan combo nightlight fan heater light in the bathroom is also fairly effective. We've had pretty good luck with those. That's a barn door that you see there that has, you have to be careful with not how you mount your handles. So your opening for your bathroom has to be wider. So it can't be just a standard 36. It has to be like 42 so that you have room to get the door back and forth, still have a 36-inch clear opening, but leave those handles outside enough so no fingers get pinched and that you still have enough movement so that people can easily glide the door open and shut. From a thermal comfort perspective, ASHRAE 170 is a standard. That standard is referenced in most of the guidelines. There's one for thermal comfort standard, that's ASHRAE 55. Those are mostly in the building codes and referenced, or they're in green building guides and sustainability guides and referenced, or they're in the licensing code and or they're referenced. So the standards and the standards process is very important because those are the standards that then get referenced from building code, licensing code, and also from sustainability. We're going to do green building rating systems and things like that. From COVID-19, we know we need fresh air. So that is one thing that's a little bit different. From a ventilation perspective, we do recommend, even if you're using, say, heat pumps or whatever, that you have added in a certain amount of air exchange. Some licensure requirements do require fresh air, but outdoor air and having that will also help the indoor air quality. It'll help with any smells and odors. It'll also help with particulate. So filtration is very important. We recommend using HEPA filters typically, or at least a MERV 13 to basically keep everything as clean as possible and as least amount of particulate as possible. So indoor environmental quality is really important. And it also helps with your energy performance. So that saves money too. So we want it to be safe and healthy, comfortable and warm. These are a friend of mine's dogs that are just the most adorable things. So your design takeaways that I'd like to share is the light and comfort. So there's an example of the contrast on the wall. You can see the handrail. You can also see the toilet seat very clearly. And can you see where you are? And you can pretty much see where you are, where you're located, how things are going. And the next one is, can you hear me? The drywall that's utilized, it looks like drywall on the ceiling in that picture, is actually acoustic panels. And that acoustic, they call it acoustic drywall, which is doesn't really sound probably correct, but it's like a panel, like an acoustical panel that you would have like a 2x2 commercial tile would be, but it's in the form that looks more like residential drywall. So we've had some colleagues utilize this very successfully. Also having indentation and things that pop out. So see where the fireplace comes out a little bit, and then you have the recess with the bookcase, and then it recesses again toward the door. Those changes in elevation also provide points that reduce reverberation. So that can also help if you have a space that's a little bit echoey. Mobility comfort, can you safely walk to me? So looking at the handrail and how the handrail goes down the corridor, and is there a handrail for you to grab? Is there a grab rail? Can you see it and allow you to walk safely to me? And are you warm enough? And you can see that this image is very much the warmth of the fireplace, but it's the warmth of the light and the red bowl that's on the top of the fireplace. It has a homey feeling. It feels warm. You'd like to be in that space. And so I think that is where we're going with the thermal comfort. We do find the radiant heat panels and doing spot heating in certain locations. At least we don't use those light bulbs anymore that get so incredibly hot that are in the ceiling. There's different ways to do that. You can do a vertical panel. They're radiant panels that can be used. You can use radiant floor heat. We've tried a couple. I've experimented with some in my house even. If you can use the electric mat that rolls underneath your ceramic tile, that's a great way to just warm up the ceramic tile. It's not uncomfortable for the caregiver, but it does warm up the floor itself if you're using ceramic, and you can use that under LVT or LVP. We've also run PEX tubing, and we've used the hot water heater to circulate the hot water around, and it makes the floor very comfortable. So those are things to think about if you're looking at new systems or you have the capacity to do a different system. Those are things that work well too. From a person-centered planning process and a care model and design, we look at the community at large because we always know that there's certain folks that are going to be able to help you, whether you're doing residential assisted living, or in our case, we do other intergenerational programming models. So we want to embrace the community. We want the community to know what we're doing. And we've also found that the more communication that you have with the community, a lot of times zoning has problems with residential assisted living. We don't understand why. But I think it's just a lack of understanding and a lack of education on their part of understanding what you're really trying to achieve. Reaching out to the community, donuts and food always help. Having meetings with the community. We've had some go around and put information in the mailbox. I don't think that's enough. I think you need to actually engage. So find out who your immediate neighbors are, go visit them, call them, talk with them, explain to them what you're doing, show them the plan, show them the process. We've had people get stopped actually through injunction through homeowners associations. So if the homeowners association is involved, know that you have a site that's there, then you really want to be aware of that. So you go at that first before you either purchase your property or your land, what you're getting into, and they know what you're doing. Inclusivity. We feel like you could utilize RAL not only for elders, but there's all kinds of other developmentally disabled folks that could potentially utilize an RAL. Often called a group home, but for example, Down syndrome, it ends in dementia. That is one of the end time outcomes of the disease or the condition. And therefore, inclusivity is important. And you may find that special needs population is something that's a high need in the community, and you may be able to fulfill that as a way of utilizing your RAL and what you're doing with it. Human interaction is super important. Engage with different people, engage with different opportunities. So we have one friend and colleague, he has a friend who does green grocer, and he does it as almost like a food truck. And he comes around and does different things. Well, that's a way to engage people and also get them to select their fresh vegetables for the day. Giving them input on what meal a week or a meal a day, everyone gets a favorite. Something like that is something we would think of as human interaction. Service access and being able to support your care providers and your caregivers. They are They are your business. And so really supporting them as much as possible is really key. And then collaboration, I think, is necessary to pull it all together. Because as simple as the model seems, there's so many nuances to it and the complications in different areas. It doesn't seem like it should be as difficult as it is, but collaborating really helps make that better. I have a few resources for you. The current guidelines are the 2022. They're called the Guidelines for Design and Construction of Residential Healthcare and Support Facilities. 2022 is starting to be adopted. 2026 will be published in the end of 2025, beginning of 2026. These volumes still have requirements, which are called minimum requirements, and then appendices that are attached. The appendices explain it. This is moving to a pure code minimum standard book as a smaller book, and then it will have a guideline accompaniment book that will go with it. And they're doing that for a few reasons, because it is becoming more important for them to be able to have guidelines and codes available online that are more accessible, because these are a pay-as-you-go type of documents in terms of buying the book, either online or the virtual version or the digital version or this. Whereas most of the codes now you can find on UpCodes, and the ICC codes are all available online. So they're breaking this out into codes for 2026. That'll be minimum requirements. And then the additional pieces and the appendices and the guidelines and diagrams and all that stuff will be in a guidance document. But for 2022, we did change over all of the assisted living sections. Michelle Pinkowski, who's a lawyer about Colorado, has helped us immensely do that. And then we also looked at inclusivity, because we find that people who are older who go into hospitals, it's like over 65% go in, are 65 and over, and yet no one addresses that their clientele is older, that are in both outpatient settings and hospitals. So we're trying to get some of the same guidance we would offer here into some of these other settings. Design Guide for Long-Term Care Homes. This is a wonderful guideline. It's a 2018 edition, but it's really well done. We have a little education site called With Seniors in Mind. Check it out. This is a colleague of mine out of Canada. Basically uses research to demonstrate every single piece that he designed. So if you're doing a resident room, it explains why it's important to do X, Y, Z in terms of your configuration for your grab bars. There is actually a study out there that says if you use if you use colored plates with food and people can see it better, they actually have better food intake. So there's all kinds of different pieces, but this is a really good, like, if evidence-based is your thing, this is a really good piece of work that Robert worked on. If you haven't read Atul Gawande's book, Being Mortal, I recommend it. It's amazing to see. He's the checklist guy who wrote about the checklist. That's how we ended up with operatory checklists. If you can imagine, there was a period of time where in the surgical suite, you did not have a checklist like you do in an airplane. And Atul Gawande was responsible for that. He also then took care of his family and his father, and Being Mortal talks about that, about aging isn't a disease, it's a condition, and that we all go through. We have a small senior living sustainability guide. It's also available for free With Seniors in Mind. It is an older version. It's dated 2011. It needs updating in terms of the environmental building part, but it does have some good process diagrams and information in it. So it's still available. And I'm really hoping this year is the year that I get that updated. So we look at aging as a proactive adventure. This is on us for them. If we can do this strategically and collaboratively, we can create a new vision for all inclusive environments for older people. This is my Go Change the World slide and Q&A.
Oh man. Oh yeah. So I was like, okay, cool. We're gonna look at designs, and the caregivers should be here and everything else should be over there. And this was like 14 levels deeper to the things I'd never even considered. Okay, cool. Blue light. You said blue light. I went and got my blue light glasses. Got it. But man, that was like the only thing. Everything else was way over my head. Just things I'd never really thought about, which is absolutely mind blowing. It all makes perfect sense. Like the sink, the slant in the sinks, that you can actually stand up near it. Just unbelievable information. And you talk as fast as I do, which I love. Yeah.
That was my
like Ashley said, this
Okay.
was a ton of information, and wow, what a treasure trove. And how many great things could you take away from this as you're building a home, Chloe and Nick? Like this, wow. You could build it with everything in mind from the beginning, and be able to serve these seniors at such a better level and for so much longer. You do all of those things, and if that prevents one fall, holy shit, it was worth it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
That's absolutely incredible. Sorry, I'm just blown away right now by this. It just totally blew my expectations out of the water. This was awesome, Jane.
Well, good. I'm glad that helped. That was my whole purpose. So I do see a couple of questions in here about carpet and using carpet versus for unequal transitions. So what we use a commercial carpet tile that's level loop. And that density will work really well with an LVT. Sometimes you can have rubber backing under your LVT too. And even rigid core, which has a it's like a little ridge and you clip in. So it's almost like a floating floor. You have to be careful with that with roller traffic though, because of that, how it's connected. But there are some different products. I don't really have a shareable list, but I'm happy to try to give you some products. Qualu Furniture is one of them. It's KWALU. We do a lot of work with Qualu over the years. And then we use commercial products for the LVP and for the carpet. And that's one of the reasons. So we don't use like rugs on top of the carpet. We make everything even. And that's why we like the tiles, because the tiles can be rotated and the theory always was that people replace the carpet tile over time. It doesn't happen unless you have a really bad stain on something, you want to pull it and put it in. But for the most part, they're easier to install and they're easier to save some as attic stock. And then some people just use LVP throughout. The reason it's tricky is that it's loud. If you're going to do that, then we recommend using something for your drywall treatment. You can even they make wood ceilings that are in strips that have an acoustic value. So that helps break that up a little bit. Yeah, if you're going to mount carpets, do carpet low level and same threshold to not create the trip hazard. Let's see if there's anything else in here.
Yeah, y'all can
Yeah.
come off mute and ask questions.
Yeah, you can ask questions too. Yeah. I'll give you my contact information and I can turn off the slides too.
Yeah, it looks like Chandler asked, he said, love the details. Looking at the layout you shared, do you recommend single occupancy or do equally as well?
It depends on your location. It depends on if you're using existing. So I would say existing homes have a tendency of utilizing more like double rooms. We don't typically recommend using a 3-person room, but we have worked on projects where that square footage worked out to be able to do 3 in a room. Typically, we would do no more than 2. We work on the circulation too, because typically if we're going to use a twin bed, most people are used to sleeping in a double bed at least, or a queen bed. If you have a larger home and your price point warrants it, in Virginia, we can fit a queen bed. They have a private room and a private bath. That was by design, but it was also the marketability of being able to charge between $7,500 and $9,500 a month was real. It also depends on where your price points are. If you're trying to give a more affordable option in the marketplace, you may want to have 2 people in a room. And then also sometimes with people, you might have a couple, or you may have one person who has dementia, and it actually is good to have a roommate or a sister. So there's all different kinds of situations. We find existing homes, like if you found a 5-bedroom home and you wanted to do 10 residents, then obviously you're going to have 2 rooms per. We're working on a small project in Carmel in Indiana right now, and they have little teeny rooms that have shared bathrooms in the hallway like you would in a house, but they have their own private little space, but they've really maximized the living room space. So the idea is that you spend your time in the living room just like you would at home, at the kitchen table just like you would at home, in the dining space, and even in the kitchen, maybe helping. It all depends on the acuity too of your resident, and from a dementia perspective, how much dementia is there, how much cognitive ability is there. So I like the idea that you don't stay in your bedroom much anyway, so you can be smaller and then you can come out and be in your home all day and then you go to bed at night. So that's more the premise of that type of person-centered care. I guess I don't have a direct answer for that, so it depends. You also know what it's like when you have a very high level, at least institutionally, when you have a very high level of dementia, you're sharing a side-by-side acute care type styling bed. and you have one bathroom that's a half bath, and that person has sundowners and they don't have anything in place to help them, and they literally go through everyone's belongings all night long and are waking that person up all night long back and forth to the bathroom, then you can think, okay, maybe this is really warrants a single room. The guidelines are tending toward that. The licensing regulations are tending toward that. And part of that is the disruption, part of it's infection control. One of my colleagues very bravely stayed overnight with the earphones that imitate what it's like to have dementia. So it's like a sound roar that happens in your ears. And they put the glasses on her and they patted her up. And my colleague didn't tell her that they were also going to make her spend the night. So she didn't know she was, so she really came out with PTSD, I think, afterward, because the woman next to her was on the opposite side of the room. It was an institutional nursing home, side-by-side bed, double-littered corridors, lots of people. The bathroom was on her side, and the woman went through her things all night long and kept going into the bathroom all night long and kept her awake all night long, regardless, plus the stuff's going on in her head, plus the fuzziness, plus the everything else, and the padding and not being able to see and not being able to move. And she said, if this wasn't an opportunity to really look at private rooms, she didn't know what was. But that was, again, institutional setting, big, long, double-lighted corridors, not a lot of staff, not programmed for that. So if you had someone who had sundowners and they weren't, none of the different things like circadian lighting and different foods and things like that didn't help, at least you have a night staff that's, if they're up in the living room, that person can come into the living room, right, and be with them. So that is a little bit different in the RAL. It's one of the reasons I really support the smaller environments in residential assisted living, why I think it's so important.
No, very helpful, Jane. Thank you so much. I have your information. I'm still collecting some more information about houses in South Carolina, so I will reach out to you.
Okay, South Carolina is gonna be a little easier now than it was before.
I've got a lot of good information.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
It only costs us like
Charlie
20
did that
grand.
for you.
Yeah.
And stay away from septic and wells.
Okay.
Yeah, seriously.
And look at your zoning. If it's zoning, for example, Spartanburg as the city is different than Spartanburg, the county. Spartanburg, the county is less lenient, but not clear on their website. So you have to go talk with them to find out what the zoning regulations are, because there's two different ones. We've also done a little bit of research because I know some people are working in North Carolina. They actually require a certificate of need. It's ridiculous, but they do. There's that.
Yeah.
Everybody. Yeah. I think we can make some good headroads. We've made good headroads so far this year. Yeah. Charlie, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, Jane, I want to be respectful of your time. One last question, two other questions. One, do you have a company you recommend for furniture?
Yeah, we like Qualu. It's KWALU. A little bit ALU. Yeah, that's right. A little bit more expensive, but that's the polymer
Okay.
company. There's also, it's Hooker Furniture is the residential, and it's called H Contract is their contract version.
Okay.
They did their homework. The guy, Dave Williams, who was working on it at the time, he did his homework in terms of the sizing and things. They have good recliners and things like that. There's other good manufacturers, but a lot of them are more hospital driven. So they're more expensive and they're not as residential. And Lauren in my office, she handles most of the different products and different furniture and stuff like that. And the little accent pieces want to feel like home. So you don't want to, I call it, don't do garanimals. So it's not, you want it to feel like your house. You have a little bit different here. You have a quirky thing here, add some plants. Plants are great. Just don't make sure they are poisonous in any way in case somebody eats it. But for the most part, live plants are a good thing too.
Yeah, Lewis is asking some good questions here about your guys' services. He asked do you do different states and do you do physical or remote visits? I know the answers, but I want your
Sure. So typically what we have found is that the local we hire, or usually the client hires a local service to do the as-built, because they can do it very quickly, much less expensively than flying a team out to do the measurements and all that kind of thing. So they go in, they use lasers and things, and they get it, and they can usually turn it around the existing conditions in a week to 3 weeks at the most. And we can have it at any level. So you can do all your electrical and all that kind of stuff too. Depends on what you need, depends on the state. And then we'll take those drawings remotely and we'll talk about it programmatically and find out what you're looking to do, how many residents you're looking to accomplish. And then we'll talk through not just the plan part, but then we look at the zoning, we look at the licensing, and we look at the building code, and then see where you fall. Every state's different because they adopt different years. Nebraska was easy on the fire side, which is odd because they have an older fire code. So they require different occupancy for what type of sprinklers have to be used, for example. So a lot of that will depend. And if we get an opportunity to use a different residential code, it's easier. So we do that kind of thing. And then we do the design part, and we can also do the interior finish part. We can do renovation or new. Most were pretty much registered. I think we're registered in about half of the states at this point. We won't be registered in California, though, because they have seismic code requirements that we do not do. And I'm not sitting for that test again to go through the seismic section in California. However, we do have colleagues out there, and we do have a couple colleagues in Texas that have helped us with measuring and some zoning questions and things like that, because Houston doesn't have any zoning. And so we have different colleagues that we use as well. But California is the only state that we wouldn't try to get reciprocity in because of that. And most of the work is remote. And then when you're doing construction processes, we can even do that process remote, or we can go and visit. So we're working in Virginia, but Virginia's local for us because it's Maryland. We live in Maryland, so we go down to do site visits. But we also do site visits to Southern Maryland, and we've done site visits to Texas, and I've done site visits to China. So you can pretty much go anywhere where people need you to go. And then if you have somebody you want to work with, and there's a design build group that we work with in Indiana, they do all the drawings and everything, and we give them the review of the senior living consulting part. So we help them lay it out. They go through the building code. I went to one of their hearings for them because I happen to be in Indianapolis. So I went to one of their hearings with them. So it depends on what you need, and we're not one size fits all. So if you need a little bit, we can do a little bit. If you need more, we can do more. If you need something in between, we can do that. We also have RAL sets that we've started doing pre-designed sets. We have one that's up. That's the Evermore model. It has 8 bedrooms, and you can purchase the set as a starting point, and then we can modify it to your site. We also have a 10-bed version. It's not on the website. Every time we get to working on it again, we start working on an actual project and it doesn't get put up, but we do have a plan that we can send you. That's a smaller, very tight plan. You can fit double beds in those rooms, but not queen beds. But it was a very clever little design that Sharnice, who works with me, came up with to maximize the square footage, but have a shared entry into rooms. And then we've done double story ones and things like that for other types of projects. And we have not finished the one with the double story with 8 and 8 with an elevator. But we do have sort of some ideas around that. We just haven't finished the design set for that.
Yeah, you guys may have noticed I think on the video that responding to Aaron's questions, I noted that, hey, you can do this by hiring nobody. You probably have to hire somebody at some point. And probably the minimal level is, hey, some design work, right? If you're doing a build or a full renovate. So that was the kind of key there. Now, if you really want help with the regulations and having a lot of that done and figured out for you, Jane's who to talk to 100%. And that's why she's here, because she and her team are excellent. They really are the best in the business. With that, just wanted to really thank you for your time, Jane. This was absolutely incredible. That's 2 incredible ones. We'll give you a few weeks off, okay?
Okay. Thanks, Charlie. Appreciate that. We're going to get the other house done.
Yeah. Jane's information is on here, or you guys can always hit me up in school, and I will link you guys in an email together so you guys can have whatever conversations you need.
Okay. Thanks, Charlie. Appreciate it, everybody. Enjoy your evening.
Thank you, Jane.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Thank you for tuning in to the Raw Room Assisted Living Podcast. We hope you found today's episode insightful. If you enjoyed it, make sure to leave us a raving 5-star review. And a quick review helps more listeners find the show and more seniors get the exceptional care they deserve.
And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. And just so you know, we have prepared some free resources for you to help you succeed in residential assisted living in addition to this podcast. Head over to theralroom.com, that is the RAL room.com, to download our free 10-step guide to launch your first or next residential assisted living home, or our 10 reasons to passively invest in residential assisted living ebooks.
And if you're ready to take the next step and make real moves in the RAL industry, join us in the RAL Room Mastermind. It is an exclusive community where we deep dive into everything you need to launch and grow your own residential assisted living business. You'll get access to recorded courses, live calls with industry experts, a RAL calculator, resources and tools, like-minded entrepreneurs, funding opportunities, and an expert networking community to help you along your journey. Be sure to join us next time on the RAL Room podcast as we continue to explore the world of residential assisted living with more great guests. See you then.